All right, buckle up because today we're diving deep into some seriously disturbing allegations about racial discrimination happening at the Station East development in Baltimore.
Yeah,
Our main source for this deep dive is a letter from the Fair Housing Clinic at the University of Maryland Law School.
right.
They're backing 4 Black homeowners who are saying they faced systemic disadvantages there.
Hmm.
And the evidence, honestly, it's pretty alarming.
Yeah.
One thing that really jumps out at me is how they're using this, what's it called, the McDonnell-Douglas core framework to build their case.
Oh, yeah, the McDonnell-Douglas framework.
It sounds kind of like a legal deep cut, to be honest.
It is. It is.
Like, what exactly is that?
Well, it's a framework specifically for situations where discrimination isn't super obvious. It's not blatant.
Okay, so more like hidden.
Yeah, hidden in policies and practices.
Mm.
It's almost like imagine trying to prove a crime without actually catching the person red-handed.
Okay.
You got to show a pattern of behavior that points directly to bias.
I'm starting to get it, but can you break it down a little more? Like, how does this framework actually work?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The McDonnell-Douglas framework, it has these 3 key steps.
Okay.
First, you have to show that people are being treated differently
Hmm.
and that this difference is tied to something like race, religion, or gender.
Right.
That those characteristics that are legally protected.
Okay, so that's the first step, proving that difference in treatment.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
Then the burden shifts to the accused party, like in this case, the developers.
Hmm.
They have to provide a reason for that different treatment that isn't based on discrimination.
Okay, so they got to come up with a non-discriminatory reason for treating people differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And finally, the people making the accusations, they need to prove that the reason given by the accused is really just a cover-up for discrimination.
So it's a 3-part legal puzzle,
It is. It's like a legal puzzle.
trying to uncover the truth.
Exactly. You're putting those pieces together.
Okay, so in this case, the homeowners are saying they were treated differently than non-Black homeowners in 4 specific areas.
Right.
And they're saying those differences point to discrimination.
That's their argument.
Yeah. The first area has to do with what are called historic tax credit deed writers.
Yeah, historic tax credit deed writers.
I'm not going to lie, that sounds like legal jargon to me.
Oh, it is.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. So let's start with historic tax credits. These are federal incentives, right,
Mm-hmm.
to encourage the rehabilitation of historic buildings.
So it's like a financial boost to help preserve old buildings.
Exactly. You got it. Preserving history.
Okay, and then what's a deed writer?
Now, a deed writer, that's like an addendum to a property deed.
Okay.
It's like attaching an extra requirement or restriction.
So an extra rule.
Yeah, an extra rule, basically.
Hmm.
In this case, the homeowners are saying that these deed writers, they were added onto their property titles. And basically what it did was put a financial claim on their homes if they tried to sell within a certain time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how exactly do these deed writers point to discrimination? Like, did everyone who bought a home at Station East have to sign these?
That's the core of their allegation right there.
Okay.
The letter argues that Black homeowners had to sign these riders, while non-Black homeowners didn't.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
And they actually backed this up with, an analysis of property records.
Oh, wow.
And it showed a stark disparity.
So they have evidence.
Yeah, it's almost like everyone's playing the same game, but some of the players, they have this hidden penalty they never even agreed to.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
So why would there be a difference? Why would some people have to sign these riders and others wouldn't? Did the developers say anything about that?
That's a key point. And the letter, it doesn't mention any explanation from the developers at all, which is a big piece of the puzzle when you're building a discrimination case.
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
What they do highlight, though, is the very real financial harm these riders caused.
So it's not just theoretical harm.
No, not theoretical at all.
This actually hit people's wallets.
Yeah, in a very real way.
Okay.
Absolutely. The homeowners, they're claiming these riders were a major obstacle when they tried to refinance their mortgages.
So like when interest rates drop and everyone's trying to save money?
Exactly. Everyone else is refinancing to save some cash.
But these homeowners are stuck.
Yeah, they're stuck with those less favorable terms.
And that could really add up over time.
Oh, absolutely.
To a lot of money.
Easily thousands of dollars over the life of a loan.
That's a huge burden, and it sounds like that was just the beginning of their problems.
Right.
The letter also alleges that on top of these deed writers, they were hit with lawsuits.
That's the second major allegation, yeah.
Okay.
The homeowners, they're claiming that HEBCAC, this is a community action coalition involved in the development, they actually filed lawsuits against them for what they called a breach of contract.
So they were being accused of breaking the rules, but because of these writers, they were forced to sign.
Yeah, that's their argument.
Hmm.
But here's the kicker.
Okay.
They say no similar lawsuits were filed against non-black homeowners, even though they were all part of the same development.
Wow.
It's like they're saying even if the deed rider was a legitimate requirement, which they're contesting, singling out black homeowners for legal action like that, well, it's just discrimination.
Hold on. So even if that rider was a real rule, the fact that it was only used against black homeowners, that's still evidence of discrimination.
That's a strong argument.
Yeah.
It's a strong argument.
Oh.
They're basically saying the deed riders were a tool used to target and punish them specifically.
Hmm.
And the letter also talks about the emotional distress these lawsuits caused and how tactics like that could be used to silence people.
Intimidation, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So people wouldn't speak up.
They even referenced Maryland's anti-SLAPP statute.
Okay, gotta be honest. You lost me there. What's an anti-SLAPP statute?
Think of it like legal protection against lawsuits that are basically meant to shut people up.
Ah.
SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation.
Okay.
And these laws are meant to prevent people from being sued just because they speak out or raise concerns.
So like a shield against frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah, exactly.
So are the homeowners suggesting these lawsuits were a form of retaliation, like they were punished for questioning those deed writers?
That's exactly what they're saying.
Yeah.
It just adds another layer to this whole complex situation.
Yeah, it does.
It raises some serious concerns about, possible attempts to suppress people who are speaking out.
Okay, so we've got the deed writers, the lawsuits.
Right.
What's the third area where the homeowners say they were treated differently?
The third one goes back to refinancing.
Okay.
They're arguing that they constantly ran into roadblocks when they tried to refinance because of those deed writers, while non-black homeowners were able to refinance without a hitch.
So two sets of rules.
Basically.
Yeah. One for black homeowners and one for everyone else.
That's their argument.
Wow.
They're painting a picture of a system that deliberately disadvantaged them.
Yeah, and the financial harm of not being able to refinance when rates are good, that's huge.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when those interest rates were so low.
It's like a double penalty.
Yeah.
First, you get hit with these riders, and then you can't even take advantage of opportunities to improve your financial situation.
Exactly. They were caught in this system that just seemed to keep them at a disadvantage. Now, it is important to note that they do mention one exception.
Okay.
A black homeowner named Mr. Miles. He was able to refinance.
No. Interesting.
But they claimed this was a mistake on the developer's part, not a real change in their policy.
So one exception doesn't invalidate the overall pattern they're alleging.
Exactly. They're saying a single mistake, if that's what it was,
Yeah.
doesn't erase all that evidence of different treatment in all the other cases.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the deed writers, the lawsuits, the refinancing obstacles. What's the last area?
The fourth and final allegation focuses on how repairs were handled.
Okay.
The homeowners, they're claiming that they experienced much slower and less effective responses to their repair requests compared to, the non-black homeowners.
So we're talking basic maintenance stuff, things that any homeowner should reasonably expect to have addressed in a timely manner.
Yeah, exactly. Things covered under their agreements.
Right, like basic homeowner rights.
Right. But the letter, it focuses on this specific detail about using third-party contractors for repairs.
Okay.
They allege that non-black homeowners, they were allowed to hire outside contractors and then get reimbursed by the developers. But the black homeowners, they were denied that option.
Wow, so they were stuck with whatever the developers chose to provide, even if it wasn't good.
That's what they're claiming.
And they're saying this affected their quality of life.
They are. Like loss of enjoyment of their homes, emotional distress from dealing with ongoing problems.
Yeah, no kidding.
Potential health risks if things weren't fixed properly.
Yeah, that's scary.
And, out-of-pocket costs for those repairs that they felt they shouldn't have to pay for.
That's a lot to deal with.
It is.
So this goes beyond just finances. This is about their comfort, well-being, feeling safe in their own homes.
Exactly. And the letter makes it very clear that these differences in how repairs were handled, on top of everything else, amount to a clear pattern of discrimination.
Right.
They're arguing that this wasn't just a series of, random incidents or misunderstandings.
It was intentional.
It was a systemic problem rooted in discrimination.
Wow. So they've built a pretty strong case.
They have.
What happens next? What could be the outcome of all this?
Well, the letter mentions that the homeowners are hoping for conciliation,
Okay.
which basically means finding a resolution that addresses their concerns
Okay.
and ensures fair treatment going forward.
So they're not just looking for money, they want real change.
Right. They want to see things change, not just hear apologies.
So what if that doesn't happen? What if they can't reach an agreement?
Well, if conciliation fails, they could definitely pursue legal action.
Okay, so this could end up in court,
It could,
and if it does, this could have implications beyond just Station East, right?
potentially, yeah.
What do you mean?
Think about it. This case is happening in Baltimore, which has this long and difficult history of housing discrimination.
Right, we talked about that a bit.
If these homeowners win, it could set a precedent for how similar cases are handled in the future.
So we're not just talking about 4 families and 1 development?
No, this is bigger.
This is about a city facing its past and trying to build a more just future.
Exactly. It raises these big questions about fairness, equity, and, the American dream of owning a home. It forces us to face the fact that even today, the fight for equal housing opportunities is far from over.
This is heavy stuff. We've covered a lot of ground today. These allegations are very serious, but I keep coming back to one question.
What's that?
If all of this is true, if there really was a deliberate attempt to disadvantage Black homeowners at Station East, why? What would motivate someone to do something like that?
That's the big question that hangs over this whole case.
It is.
And unfortunately, it might not have an easy answer.
Yeah, you're right.
Understanding those motivations, it's crucial not just for this case, but for addressing the broader issue of housing discrimination everywhere.
You're right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Maybe we can find some answers as we go deeper into this case and learn more about the history of housing discrimination in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So we'll continue our deep dive in part 2, where we'll take a closer look at that broader context and see how these allegations fit into the bigger picture.
I'm looking forward to it. It should be illuminating.
Me too.
Yeah. Welcome back. As we look closer at these claims of racial discrimination at Station East, one thing that really stands out to me is the possibility that the developers might have actually tried to silence these homeowners.
You're talking about the lawsuits filed against them, right?
Exactly.
The ones related to those historic tax credits.
Right.
The Fair Housing Clinic's letter specifically mentions Maryland's anti-cell LAPP statute, which makes me think these lawsuits might have been a way to intimidate them or discourage them from speaking out.
Yeah.
It's like they were being penalized just for daring to question those deed writers.
Exactly. Remember those anti-SLAPP laws?
Yeah.
They're there to protect people from these bogus lawsuits that are aimed at suppressing free speech.
Right. So people can speak their minds without fear of legal retaliation.
Exactly. It's like using the legal system as a weapon to silence critics.
Wow. So in this context, the homeowners are saying these lawsuits were a form of retaliation, like they were punished for raising concerns about discrimination.
That's their argument.
It's like they're saying, we spoke up about unfair treatment, and bam, we got hit with lawsuits.
Yeah, and if that's true, it's pretty messed up.
It is. It adds a whole other layer to this situation.
It does.
We've already discussed the financial burden of the deed writers and the refinancing obstacles, but now we're talking about potential legal harassment on top of all that.
Right.
If these homeowners are right, they got hit with a triple whammy of unfair treatment.
It makes you wonder if they were really trying to silence these homeowners, what were they trying to hide?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It definitely raises some red flags. I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake or overlook a bias, but to actively try and silence people who are raising legitimate concerns, that's different.
Right. That seems more deliberate.
It suggests a deliberate effort to maintain a system that benefits some at the expense of others.
It really makes you think about those power dynamics.
Yeah.
Who has the power to make the rules? Who benefits from those rules, and who gets silenced when they try to challenge the system?
Yeah.
This isn't just about individual prejudice. It's about how institutions and policies can create and perpetuate disparities.
You're so right. We can't just focus on individual bad actors.
Yeah.
We have to look at the systems that enable discrimination to thrive.
It also makes you wonder about the developers' motivations. If they had a legitimate reason for all these discrepancies, wouldn't they want to be upfront about it?
Yeah, you'd think so.
Wouldn't they want to clear their name and address these concerns head on?
Logically, yes. But we have to keep in mind we're only getting one side of the story.
That's true.
It's possible they have a justification we just haven't heard yet.
That's fair. But even if they do offer an explanation, the homeowners still have to prove that it's a pretext.
Right.
a cover-up for discrimination.
And that's where things get really tricky.
Yeah, how do you prove what's going on in someone's head?
It's the challenge with proving discrimination, especially
Yeah.
when it's not out in the open or explicitly stated.
Yeah.
You can't read someone's mind and know their true intentions. You have to rely on patterns of behavior, statistical evidence, and a thorough examination of all the circumstances to build a case.
It's like piecing together a puzzle with some of the pieces missing, and you have to figure out what the picture is based on what you do have.
That's a great analogy.
It's a long process, and it requires a legal framework that can handle that complexity.
Exactly.
Which is why frameworks like McDonnell-Douglas are so important.
Right.
They give us the tools to identify and challenge discrimination, even when it's buried under layers of bureaucracy and legalese.
It recognizes that discrimination isn't always about, shouting slurs or hanging up whites-only signs.
It's often much more subtle than that.
It can be much more insidious.
It's a good reminder that we can't just sit back and wait for blatant discrimination to show up.
Right.
We have to actively examine our systems and policies.
Ask those tough questions.
And hold people accountable.
Absolutely. And we have to listen to those who are speaking up about their experiences, even when those experiences make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because those voices are essential to understanding how discrimination actually works in the real world.
I agree. And their voices can help guide us toward solutions.
Absolutely.
This case really underscores the importance of listening to those voices, especially in a city like Baltimore, with its long and complex history of segregation and housing inequality.
Right.
It makes you wonder, is this just an isolated incident at Station East, or is it a symptom of a much larger problem?
It's a crucial question, and it's one that we need to explore further.
Okay.
Baltimore's history is deeply intertwined with housing discrimination.
Yeah, it's a long and troubling history.
From redlining to discriminatory lending practices, Black families have been systematically denied access to opportunities for homeownership and wealth building for decades.
It's hard to believe that these openly racist policies were once legal and normal.
I know.
And even though those policies are gone, now you're saying their effects are still being felt generations later.
Think about it. Being denied homeownership meant it was that much harder to build wealth. And that disadvantage was passed down, limiting the opportunities for future generations.
It is a vicious cycle.
It is a tragic chain reaction.
Yeah.
And while we've made some progress with fair housing laws, those deeply rooted patterns of inequality are incredibly difficult to erase.
Yeah, it's a long road.
We see the consequences playing out in Baltimore,
Yeah.
in the concentration of poverty,
Yeah.
the disparities in education and healthcare, even the physical layout of the city itself.
It's like the city's carrying the weight of its past, trying to move forward, but still burdened by those historical injustices.
That's a good way to put it.
So this case isn't just about what happened at Station East.
It's bigger than that.
It's about a city coming to terms with its legacy and striving to create a future where everyone has an equal chance.
Exactly. And this case really highlights the moral side of housing discrimination.
Does.
It's not just about legal technicality.
It's about right and wrong.
It's about fundamental fairness, the very core of equal opportunity.
You're right. We can't talk about this without acknowledging the human cost.
The families and communities torn apart by these practices.
It goes way beyond finances.
It touches on the very core of stability, security, that sense of belonging.
Imagine being denied a place to call home, a safe haven for your family.
It undermines the very foundation of a person's life.
And it ripples outward, doesn't it?
It does.
Affecting their health, their education, their job opportunities, even their self-worth.
Absolutely.
It creates this cycle of disadvantage that's so hard to break free from.
So hard.
This is all incredibly heavy and complex.
It is.
But we can't just dwell on the problem.
No, we have to find solutions.
How do we move forward from this?
Yeah.
How do we dismantle these systems of inequality and make sure everyone has access to safe, affordable, and fair housing?
That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no simple answer, but I think the first step is acknowledging the problem.
Okay.
We need honest conversations about the legacy of housing discrimination and its impact today.
Yeah, facing our past.
We need to hear the stories of those who've been directly affected.
Really listen and understand their experiences.
Acknowledge their pain.
It's about understanding the roots of the problem so we can find ways to fix it.
And recognizing that this isn't just history. This is a present reality for so many people.
Exactly. So once we acknowledge the problem, then we can start to look for those solutions.
Yeah.
What are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, investing in genuinely affordable housing,
Okay.
strengthening fair housing enforcement, and creating community development initiatives that empower residents.
So empowering people to be part of the solution.
Exactly. And we can't forget about addressing the economic disparities that often lead to housing instability in the first place.
So it's a multi-pronged approach tackling these issues from all sides.
Right.
It's not going to be easy, but it's essential if we want to build a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely.
And cases like this one at Station East, as challenging as they are,
Yes.
they can be powerful catalysts for change.
They can.
They force us to confront the reality of discrimination, and they inspire us to work for a better future.
They illuminate the cracks in our systems and remind us that there's still work to be done.
Yeah, they highlight the need for vigilance, for holding those in power accountable, and for fighting for policies that promote fair housing.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play
We do.
in building that more equitable future.
Speaking of Baltimore's history in Part 3, we'll dive even deeper into that history of housing discrimination, explore how it's shaped the city, and see what lessons we can learn from the past as we look toward the future.
I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
Me too. It's going to be eye-opening.
It is.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the allegations of racial discrimination at Station East in Baltimore. We've covered the legal framework, the 4 major allegations, and that unsettling possibility that the developers may have tried to silence those homeowners. But we also started talking about Baltimore's history of housing inequality, and I think it's time to really dig into that. What are those historical echoes that we're seeing reflected in this case?
It's like we're holding this Station E situation up against this backdrop of Baltimore's past and just seeing how those patterns line up. Redlining, discriminatory lending practices, they were just rampant for decades, shaping the entire landscape of opportunity in this city.
Yeah.
Black families systematically denied loans and access to homeownership in specific areas, all backed by law and policy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that those explicitly racist policies were once just legal and normal. And even though they're gone now, you're saying the consequences still echo through generations.
Imagine this.
Mm.
Being denied homeownership meant it was so much harder to build wealth, and that disadvantage, it got passed down, limiting the opportunities for future generations. It's like a chain reaction. And while we've definitely made progress with fair housing laws, these deep-seated patterns of inequality are incredibly tough to reverse. We see the results etched into Baltimore in concentrated poverty, in unequal access to good education and healthcare.
It's almost like the city's carrying this heavy weight of its past, trying to move forward, but still burdened by those historical injustices. So this case isn't just about Station East. It's about a city wrestling with its legacy and trying to create a future where everyone actually has a fair chance.
That's exactly it. And this case really brings that moral dimension of housing discrimination into focus. It's not about legal loopholes. It's about fundamental fairness, the very heart of equal opportunity.
We can't talk about all this without acknowledging the human impact.
Yeah.
The families and communities torn apart by these practices, it goes way beyond finances. It's about that feeling of stability, security, truly belonging.
Absolutely. Imagine being denied a place to call home, a safe space for yourself and your family. It eats away at the very foundation of your life. It impacts your health, your education, your job prospects, even your self-worth. It's a cycle of disadvantage that's incredibly difficult to break free from.
It all feels incredibly heavy and complex, but we can't just dwell on the problems.
Yeah.
How do we dismantle these systems of inequality? How do we make sure everyone has access to safe, affordable, and fair housing?
I think it starts with honesty. Facing our past, head-on open conversations about the legacy of housing discrimination and how it still affects us today. And that means listening to those who've lived through it, understanding their experiences and acknowledging their pain.
It's about understanding the root of the problem so we can find the right solutions and recognizing that this isn't just a history lesson. This is a current reality for so many people.
Exactly. Then comes the tough part, finding those solutions, investing in genuinely affordable housing, strengthening fair housing enforcement, creating programs that empower residents to take charge. And we can't ignore those underlying economic disparities that contribute to housing instability.
It's a multi-pronged approach, tackling these issues from different angles.
Yeah.
It's not going to be quick or easy, but it's a fight worth having.
Absolutely. And cases like Station East, as challenging as they are, can actually spark change. They expose those deep-seated inequalities in our housing systems. And they remind us that we all have a part to play in building a more just and equitable future.
They emphasize the need for vigilance, for holding those in power accountable, for demanding policies that promote fair housing. We all have a role in creating that future.
We do. It can be as simple as educating ourselves about the issues, supporting organizations on the front lines, or speaking up when we see injustice happening. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a more just world.
So as we close out our deep dive on this case, We want to leave you with this thought. What action will you take today to help create a more just and equitable housing landscape? Maybe donate to an organization, write to your elected officials, do some more research, and educate yourself. Because we all have a part to play in creating a world where everyone has a place to call home, a place where they feel safe, respected, and valued. Remember, awareness leads to action, and action is what drives real, lasting change.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep asking those tough questions. Keep listening to those who are most impacted. And keep pushing for a more just and equitable world for everyone.